Hello there and welcome back to the channel. This is Nerd World, and today slightly not off topic but odd video for me. It's sort of an open question and a bit of my own speculation, so bear with me. There's always been a question I have had about Star Trek and Starfleet in general that was never greatly explored in, quite frankly, any of the series, with the exception maybe of Enterprise, but for obvious reasons. And that is, when you become a member of the Federation, what happens to your existing fleet? Now, they mention in Deep Space Nine the Bajorans want to join the Federation. They talk about integrating the Bajoran militia into Starfleet. And that basically, does this imply that if you are to become a member of the Federation, your own fleet becomes redundant and all your ships then end up just being Starfleet vessels, and you don't have a naval force of your own outside of maybe civilian ships, which of course would still exist, as civilian vessels are often seen in Star Trek. Some of them of human origin, clearly, like the SS Raven, and other ships like Harry Mudd's vessel, or even the SS Aurora, ships that are clearly civilian built but have Starfleet design principles. And then you see some Vulcan transports, things like that here and there, like the warp sled, things like that, that although superficially have a sort of Starfleet feel to them. The T'Pau, one of the Vulcan transports from the Next Generation, clearly not a Starfleet design. But do these ships represent civilian fleets or any kind of government representative? And then there was a recent episode of Star Trek Lower Decks where they're saved by a Vulcan cruiser of some kind, or Vulcan science vessel, but this is clearly a completely original Vulcan ship of the 24th century. So clearly the Vulcans still retain their own navy, so this could be a case, and probably is, of Starfleet or Star Trek contradicting itself to a degree. Now, my understanding of Gene Roddenberry's original vision was it was all one big happy fleet and everyone was working together. But then there are certain anomalies within this that don't make sense. Now, sometimes the sort of little things in there, like the ships I'm going to talk about specifically, which are the USS Hera, the USS Intrepid, and the USS Tucumbra. These are three Starfleet vessels whose crews were either completely Vulcan or predominantly Vulcan, like the USS Hera. These ships, a 23rd century Constitution class USS Intrepid, a 24th century Nebula class, the Tucumbra, which was actually named for a Vulcan of some description, although I can't find who or what exactly it was named after, it was just a Vulcan word. And obviously the USS Hera, which is an unknown classification of ship and Alpha Cannon. These three vessels, as I said, had predominantly Vulcan crews, so that leads me to that question. Now, why did Starfleet allow that? These crews, initially, they were Starfleet uniforms. Now, you would think, I know Starfleet is a predominantly human organization with something like 80% of its members being human, but if Starfleet represents all the Federation, then all the naval forces and others from these fleets should have all integrated into a single, coherent navy, right? But they clearly haven't. What do you want? Come here then. Right. So, if they haven't integrated into a full fleet, where are the rest of their ships? We don't really see or hear too much of them. Is it a single navy? Is it a coalition of different forces? Or do Starfleet give their ships to local governments? Which is a question. See, why would Starfleet, a predominantly human organization, give its ships away? They don't like sharing technology, and I get everyone in the Federation shares, and it's one super state in a sense. But there's an element of, let's say, racism. Let's use that word. Why would it be permitted for any Starfleet ship or crew or captain to just go, I want my entire crew to be Vulcan, not a merged crew from different races drawn from the Federation, which clearly has its benefits. There's an episode of Enterprise, for example, while they're in the Expanse, where it turns out that Vulcans are vulnerable to Trellium-D. It basically drives them insane and kills them ultimately. An entire Vulcan ship fell victim to that, so clearly the Vulcans are useless in the Expanse pretty much. But humans are not affected by Trellium, it doesn't bother them at all. So actually having Vulcans on your ship, bad, but having humans on board, good. So these mixed crews bring different strengths and weaknesses. This is often mentioned in Star Trek. Certain races, although this is a broad term, humans make good engineers, Klingons make good soldiers, Andorians make good soldiers, Vulcans make good scientists, etc., etc. So you draw on these general strengths of a civilization and put people into positions aboard your ships that make a more broad crew with a broader palette of abilities, rather than having to rely purely on one single species to provide all the necessary strengths and weaknesses to a ship. But you inherit, by doing that, the purity of a single species, which may have weaknesses in some areas. Ferengi, for example, will be inherently greedy, so having a ship filled with Ferengi, basically a commerce vessel. Things of this nature. But the idea of these merged crews, who says it was okay to just go, okay, just have a full Vulcan crew? Now, the reason this came about was, in the original series, they wanted to have a Vulcan ship in Starfleet, or more accurately, they wanted a Starfleet vessel to have a Vulcan name. Basically saying, like, instead of them keep being named after Second World War warships, like the Enterprise, named after the, obviously, USS Enterprise, an aircraft carrier, and etc., and named after shuttles and stuff, all from Earth, clearly. Now, Starfleet is an Earth organization, explains it, but there is an Excelsior-class starship in canon called the USS Gorkon, named after the Klingon Chancellor. So they do occasionally name ships from non-human purposes, but my question, which I keep sort of drifting along here, is do these ships which have Vulcan names or entirely Vulcan crews, which are the only examples, because I can't find any examples of a ship which has an entirely Andorian crew or Tellarite crew or something, or Denobulan, are they truly Starfleet ships, or are they a Starfleet built vessel with a crew that is actually working for the, I don't know, Vulcan High Command or Science Director or something? My feeling is they are pure Starfleet vessels, but then why is Starfleet allowing one of their ship's captains to decide, I don't want anything but my own species aboard this ship? The USS Hera was different. It had a predominantly Vulcan crew, which may have just been how it ended up, but its captain was human and some of the other crew were from other races. The Tucumbra was originally just is an entirely Vulcan crew, as stated in the episode it appears in. The USS Intrepid, which was originally meant to have had a Vulcan name, but as I said, they changed that idea and just stuck with the Intrepid, but gave it just an entirely Vulcan crew, was later retconned, at least in other sources, to be a predominantly Vulcan crew. So the only one we know for 100% fact that in canon it's never been retconned or was thought to be something else was the Tucumbra, which has an entirely Vulcan crew. But I just don't understand why Starfleet would allow this to happen. It seems somewhat racist. Imagine if Captain Picard had turned around and said, I don't want any other species aboard my ship, I just want humans. Now, I'm sure there's ways you could make it happen, but are those the kinds of people you want commanding your ships? And it's the same argument if they're not human. Even if there was a Vulcan officer who said, I don't want Vulcans aboard my ship, there'd still be some question as to why. Is there an inherent stigma or issue with that species? Or is it that there could be a purpose behind it? There's actually a logical reason to crew a ship entirely with a single species. Now, you could be saying you swap crews in and out, but that's my question, and it bothers me. And it always bugged me that you don't really see too many of non-Starfleet ships which are not civilian. You don't see too many civilian ships overall either, but you don't see a lot of Andorian or other vessels, not until Enterprise, and the only reason you see them in that is it's pre-Federation. So of course these races must have already had warp technology to be made contact with in the first place, and then later they formed into the Federation, and then subsequent races, they only contact them once they're already spacefaring, and even then they tend to go with if they're already warp capable rather than just capable of reaching space. Otherwise, first contact with Earth might have been made when Sputnik went into orbit. So I've always questioned it, and I always believed their fleet still existed in my headcanon, and Lower Decks has just confirmed that. Their fleets do still exist. Now, there are other ships within the Federation, within Starfleet, that are named for non-human sources. We see in Discovery the USS Tuplana Hath, and there are other vessels that are also, as I said, like the USS Gorkon, that are either named after individuals or other ships from other species. But these races clearly still retain their own starships. We also saw in Discovery that there were other Vulcan ships, but these were vessels, small transports, things of this nature, shuttles that were attached to the Vulcan government or high command in some way, shape or form. We didn't see too many larger vessels. There's an episode of Enterprise where we see future vessels, which is a future Vulcan combat cruiser from God knows when in the future, So it's hinted and alluded to that these ships do exist, but why then does Starfleet allow its ships to be crewed entirely with non-human personnel? I just found it weird, and it seems not very Starfleet. It seems non-inclusive, which the Federation is all meant to be about it. And I'm just seeing if anyone else has had the same thought, and anyone can think of a rational reason why they would allow it. I remember the episode of Deep Space Nine coming out when I was younger, and I remember thinking it at the time, why would Starfleet allow this captain to crew his ship entirely with Vulcans? And I don't particularly like the episode, so to be honest, I've not rewatched it very often. Even when I give DS9 a rewatch, it's one of the episodes I tend to skip, but it does always bug me. It's bugged me since I was a kid and I watched that episode, and I thought that doesn't seem very Starfleet to me. And then the recent episode of Lower Decks kind of jogged my memory on it, and then someone put a comment in one of my other videos about a Vulcan ship, the USS Intrepid. And again, it all put it back together in my head of like, well, there are actually examples of this, but why? What reason? Are they, as I said, are they attached to the specific species? Are they going into a situation that purely requires that race and not others? For example, dealing with Klingons is normally done by Vulcans. And in a lot of ways, Vulcans are almost the insidious members of the Federation. I've watched videos actually by Lore Reloaded, if you've never watched his. He does a lot of speculation about how the Vulcans created, with their pacifistic nature, a lot of the problems. They restrained Starfleet. A restrained, held back Starfleet caused the issues with the Klingon Empire. It meant that the Battle of Wolf 359 was lost. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's true, but it's interesting point of view. And the episodes are actually really good. I kind of recommend his channel. It's a good channel. There's very interesting speculative videos. Now, with all that said, that's my speculation. It's a little out of my normal canon lore stories, but it is canonical. Everything I've just said is canonical. It's all in there. It's in the show. But I have to question why. Oh, both of you are here this time. What do you have to? What are you looking at? I guess that's the end of this video. They want something. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and please check out my website, which is also relatively new and has a blog on there. It's about it at the moment, really, but it's there. And with that said, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.